Imagine being locked away, not for a crime, but for your ideas and where you came from. This is the shocking true story of immigrant anarchists in 1880s America. Subscribe now and discover the secrets behind fear, injustice, and courage that history almost forgot. The moment began with a flash, not of light, but of fear. It was May 4th, 1886, and Chicago's Haymarket Square buzzed with tens of thousands of workers demanding fair hours and better lives. They chanted, they listened to speakers, they believed in change. But in an instant, everything shattered. A crude bomb exploded near the police line. Dust and smoke filled the street. Officers fell. Civilians screamed and ran. In a heartbeat, a peaceful rally turned into chaos. But what made this explosion terrifying wasn't only the blast, it was what came next. Police fired into the crowd without clear orders. People who had come for justice suddenly found themselves hunted as criminals. Within hours, newspapers were filled with one name: anarchists. People who opposed government power and wanted radical transformation. Many of these anarchists were immigrants, men and women who had come from Europe hoping for freedom and opportunity. Now they were being blamed for terror, bloodshed, and threatening the very soul of America. The city shut down. Guards surrounded meeting halls. Streets were watched. Every immigrant with radical ideas, even those who had nothing to do with the Haymarket bomb, became a suspect. That very night, dozens of these immigrants were rounded up, dragged into jail cells, and labeled threats to national security. In the darkness behind bars, their fates were no longer determined by facts, but by fear. And yet, not a single clear witness saw who threw the bomb. Not one defendant was caught at the scene. Still, Chicago's police and politicians wanted someone to pay. The evidence was shaky, the confessions were confusing, and the world was about to watch as fear, not truth, shaped their fate. But what happened next would shatter lives and expose the deep fear growing across America, a fear that would spread far beyond Chicago and reach the highest walls of prisons from the East Coast to the plains of the West. To understand why this moment exploded into something much bigger, affecting hundreds of immigrant workers, thinkers, and families, we have to go back in time, before the blast, before the arrests, before the fear became a movement. Before the bomb, dreams of a new world. In the decades after the Civil War, America was changing faster than most people could follow. Factories sprung up in cities like Chicago, New York, and Boston. Trains and steel mills worked night and day. But while the nation grew rich, the workers stayed poor. Long hours, low pay, and dangerous conditions were normal. Families lived in crowded tenements. Children worked in mills. Many people felt trapped in a life of endless labor. Thousands of immigrants arrived from Europe, hoping for work and a chance to build a better life. They came from places like Germany, Italy, Poland, and Russia. Some brought with them new ideas about justice, equality, and workers' rights. Among these ideas was anarchism, a belief that people could organize society without oppressive government control. Anarchists did not believe in chaos. Many believed in fairness, cooperation, and freedom, but their radical language frightened many Americans. As more workers struggled, unions grew. Leaders spoke openly about fair pay and humane hours. Newspapers printed fiery editorials. Organizers held rallies where immigrants and Americans joined hands. The power of these gatherings shocked factory owners and authorities alike. They saw a rising force, not just physically, but intellectually, that questioned the existing order. The spread of these ideas wasn't secret. Lectures were held in crowded halls. Clubs debated politics and liberty. Many immigrants saw these discussions as a way to claim the very freedoms that had drawn their families to America. But to others, especially lawmakers and business elites, these voices seemed dangerous, unpredictable, even un-American. Tension built. Protests became louder. Strikes brought factories to a halt. Politicians accused radicals of inciting violence. Newspapers labeled immigrants as troublemakers, and authorities began watching immigrant communities with suspicion, not always because of crime, but because their beliefs challenged power. Just weeks before the Haymarket rally, a strong movement had pushed for a nationwide strike advocating an 8-hour workday. Workers planned coordinated demonstrations. Chicago became one of the central meeting points because of its huge industrial workforce. People didn't expect violence, they expected fairness. But in a moment, one explosion would turn hope into fear and voices into suspects.
When the Haymarket bomb detonated, it wasn't just force that blew apart the square. It was the eruption of years of tension building up. Newspapers raced to name culprits. Politicians shouted for justice. Rumors spread faster than facts. In a city already filled with uncertainty, the shock of the blast planted a seed that anarchists, particularly immigrant anarchists, were a threat to everything America stood for. People began to wonder, could those who came here for freedom really be plotting violence? Little evidence mattered anymore. Fear was louder than truth. That night, crowds not tied to the explosion were hauled into jailhouses. Homes were searched. Newspapers published lists of suspects. And inside cold prison cells, immigrant anarchists waited. Many bewildered by what was happening, others fearful for their families, all unsure of what would come next. In the chaos of accusations, one question hung in the air. Did these men really believe in violence, or were they being punished for their ideas? And as the city braced itself for a trial that would grip the nation, the punishment had only just begun. The clanging of iron doors echoed through the Chicago jail as the first of the immigrant anarchists were led inside, their hands bound, faces pale with fear and confusion. Outside, the city was alive with rumors. Crowds gathered near courthouse steps, shouting for justice, for punishment, for blood. Inside those stone walls, the men could hear nothing but the shouts, the clatter of boots, and their own racing hearts. They had come to America seeking opportunity, a chance at freedom, and now, suddenly, they were prisoners in their own dream. The arrests didn't stop with Chicago. Across the country, authorities began rounding up immigrants associated with anarchist clubs, newspapers, or even private discussions. In New York, Boston, and St. Louis, men were taken from their homes in the dead of night. Families woke to find fathers, sons, and brothers gone, taken by men in uniform with no explanation beyond vague accusations of radical beliefs. Many of these immigrants had never touched a bomb, never shouted in anger at an official, never even protested in public. Yet suspicion alone was enough to put them behind bars. The fear spread quickly. Newspapers printed sensational headlines. Anarchist plot threatens America. Foreign radicals in our streets. People whispered in markets, on trains, and crowded apartments. Children overheard their parents speak of spies and enemies. In the very air of cities, panic mingled with prejudice. Inmates, trapped inside the same prisons that had held them for petty crimes or labor disputes, now found themselves labeled enemies of the state, their ethnicity a mark of guilt. In the cells, conditions were harsh. The men slept on cold wooden benches, often with no blankets. The guards watched them with suspicion, sometimes with open hostility, suspecting plots in every whisper, every glance. Letters to family were censored or lost, leaving loved ones anxious and terrified. Some prisoners began to wonder if they would ever see the outside world again. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, with uncertainty gnawing at their resolve. Yet still a sense of solidarity grew among them. They shared whispered words of comfort, recounted memories of home, and debated quietly the ideas that had brought them here in the first place. It was dangerous. Talking could lead to punishment or worse, but silence was a slow death of the spirit. Outside the prison walls, the legal machinery began to move. Chicago's trial of the Haymarket suspects became the nation's obsession. Courtrooms overflowed, journalists scribbled frantically, and lawyers struggled against mounting public pressure. The evidence against the men was often circumstantial, a pamphlet here, a meeting there, a rumor whispered in a dark alley. But the courts were under scrutiny, and prosecutors knew the public demanded a conviction. Fear had become evidence, and ideology had become a crime. The prison cells were filled not only with the accused, but also with those swept up in the growing crackdown. Immigrants who had once lived quietly, working in factories, delivering newspapers, attending shops. They were now treated as dangerous radicals. Their arrests were meant as warnings, a way to show the nation that dissent, especially from foreign-born citizens, would not be tolerated. It was a tactic of fear, aimed at silencing voices before they could speak. But this strategy had consequences. Families were torn apart, communities were shaken, and trust in law enforcement began to fray. The line between justice and persecution blurred. And yet, even as despair hung heavy in the air, whispers of rebellion grew. The men inside the cells shared stories of protests, ideas of fairness, and plans to maintain hope under the harshest conditions. They knew that their struggle was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that fear could not break human spirit, that truth mattered more than rumors, and that one day the nation might face its own prejudices. But tension was rising. Chicago's trial loomed. Federal authorities were watching every move of immigrant communities, and the fear of another violent incident hovered like a storm cloud. One small mistake, one act of desperation could ignite a new wave of violence. The prisoners knew that history was watching, and the nation itself seemed poised on the edge of panic. And then, a shocking turn of events struck. A secret note was discovered in one cell, suggesting that a plot was being planned inside the very prison that was supposed to contain them. Guards panicked, prisoners were moved, and the rumors grew louder than ever before. Was this a real conspiracy, or just another trick of fear? The answer would change everything, for the accused, for immigrant communities across the nation, and for the future of justice in America. The city waited, tense and uncertain. Families outside prayed, guards inside tightened security, and the prisoners, huddled in the shadows, whispered to each other, wondering if anyone in the world would ever understand the truth.
The courthouse in Chicago was packed beyond capacity. Journalists elbowed their way through the crowd, scribbling furiously in notebooks, while citizens craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the accused. The immigrant anarchists, once ordinary men seeking work and a better life, now stood in front of the court, faces pale, hands shaking, eyes betraying both fear and defiance. The air smelt of sweat, dust, and tension. Every whisper seemed amplified. Every glance felt like accusation. The trial of the Haymarket defendants was unlike anything America had seen before. Prosecutors painted a terrifying picture. Foreign-born radicals plotting to destroy society, to bring chaos to cities, to murder police officers and threaten the very foundation of the nation. They called the immigrants dangerous conspirators, even when evidence was thin. Most witnesses described little more than speeches, meetings, and pamphlets, ideas, not bombs. But in the eyes of the public, ideas had become crimes, and fear had become proof. The defense attorneys struggled to make their voices heard over the roar of the crowd outside and the political pressure inside. They argued that their clients had no direct connection to the deadly explosion at Haymarket Square. They pleaded that justice should be based on facts, not prejudice. Yet every day, more stories appeared in newspapers about anarchist plots in other cities. From New York to San Francisco, immigrant communities were being swept up in arrests, detained and questioned, as though their birthplace alone made them guilty. Families were torn apart, businesses disrupted, and ordinary lives upended. Inside the prison cells, the men prepared for what seemed inevitable. The walls, once merely cold and confining, now felt like a symbol of a nation's fear. Guards were stricter than ever. Conversations were monitored. Any attempt to communicate with the outside world was punished.
Letters were delayed or destroyed, leaving families in anguish. The prisoners' minds were filled with uncertainty, wondering whether they would ever see freedom again. Yet even in this despair, their resilience grew. They discussed ideas quietly, comforted one another, and held on to the belief that truth might eventually prevail. But as the trial unfolded, the nation became increasingly polarized. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, some demanding mercy, others shouting for execution. Newspapers published sensational headlines every day. Rumors of new conspiracies spread panic across cities. In Boston, authorities raided anarchist clubs. In St. Louis, immigrant communities were monitored closely. People feared violence at every corner, convinced that radicals could strike again at any moment. The United States, a country built on freedom, was now gripped by fear of its own citizens. The verdict finally arrived. Several defendants were sentenced to death, others to long prison terms. Shock rippled through immigrant communities. Families wept openly, neighbors whispered in fear, and the streets seemed heavier, weighed down by injustice. For many, the punishment seemed less about crime and more about sending a message. Dissent from foreign-born citizens would not be tolerated. Even after the sentences, the ripple effect continued. Across the country, authorities increased surveillance of immigrant neighborhoods. Political clubs and newspapers faced scrutiny. Lives were forever changed. Some immigrants fled cities in fear. Some abandoned their beliefs to avoid suspicion. And yet, the memory of those imprisoned lingered. Stories of courage and injustice whispered from one generation to the next. The trials left lasting scars. They became symbols of what happens when fear overrides justice. Innocent men were punished for being different, for speaking ideas that challenged authority. Prisons, once places for criminals, had become instruments of political control. And the lessons of that time, the dangers of panic, prejudice, and ideology-driven arrests, continue to echo in America's legal system even today. But the story was not over. Even in the darkness of their cells, the anarchists' courage had inspired others. Ideas could not be locked away. The fear that authorities tried to spread could not fully silence human voices. And while America would struggle for years to reconcile justice with fear, the events of those years left one undeniable truth: the power of belief, identity, and hope can survive even behind the coldest prison walls.
As the sun set over Chicago, the city seemed calm, yet tension lingered in the air. Families still mourned, communities still whispered, and prisons still held those who had dared to speak. But somewhere in the shadows, a quiet revolution of thought continued, reminding America that even fear has limits, and that freedom, fragile and hard-won, is never truly gone. The courtrooms emptied, but the echoes of judgment lingered in every immigrant neighborhood across America. Chicago had sentenced the first wave of anarchists, but the fear they sparked had already spread coast to coast. Families still huddled in cramped apartments, whispering warnings to one another. Parents held their children close, afraid that a single misstep, a misunderstood word, or a rumor could bring the authorities to their door. What began as a single bomb in Haymarket Square had ignited a nationwide panic, and no one felt safe. Not even those who had never protested, never carried a pamphlet, and never raised a voice against authority. Prisons across the country swelled with immigrant prisoners accused of radical beliefs. In New York, men were held in windowless cells for weeks, interrogated relentlessly. In St. Louis, entire clubs were raided, their members dragged into custody with little explanation. Many prisoners had committed no crime beyond speaking in a foreign language, reading newspapers from Europe, or attending meetings to discuss ideas. Yet in the eyes of officials, suspicion was enough. Fear had become a law. The very principles that drew these immigrants to America, freedom, speech, and hope for opportunity,
had become chains around their wrists. Inside the cells, the men faced a new kind of struggle. Some resisted, demanding their rights and asserting their innocence. Others fell into despair, haunted by the knowledge that the outside world had turned against them. Guards watched with suspicion, believing every whispered conversation or shared glance was part of some hidden plot. Letters from family were rare or censored. Visitors were questioned thoroughly. In some prisons, men slept on hard benches or the cold floor, clothed in uniforms that marked them as criminals simply for their beliefs. Yet even in these conditions, the prisoners found ways to resist quietly. They shared knowledge, comforted each other, and passed down ideas of justice, keeping their spirits alive behind the walls that were meant to break them. The trials and arrests sent shockwaves through communities. Newspapers ran headlines declaring that anarchists were a threat to the nation, warning citizens to be vigilant. Immigrant communities were divided. Some fled the cities in fear. Others abandoned radical beliefs to avoid suspicion. Friends and neighbors watched each other warily. Trust eroded. The fear of being accused became almost as powerful as the law itself. And while some authorities claimed these measures were necessary for national security, critics argued that justice had been sacrificed on the altar of panic. Over time, the story of the Haymarket anarchists became a symbol of both injustice and resistance. Executions were carried out, prison terms served, and some prisoners were eventually released, but the mark of fear remained. Immigrant communities had learned a bitter lesson, that in times of panic, the innocent could be punished and ideas could be treated as crimes. Yet even as the nation tried to suppress dissent, the memory of courage, resilience, and the fight for freedom endured. Books, articles, and later histories told the story of men who had dared to speak, even when speaking was dangerous. The anarchist scare also reshaped America's prison and legal systems. Authorities introduced stricter surveillance of politically active immigrants, expanding powers that would later influence national security policies. Courts struggled to balance public pressure with justice. Newspapers had shown the power of sensationalism to sway public opinion, and communities began to understand the dangers of prejudice and panic. And while the events of the late 1880s and 1890s were born of fear, they ultimately sparked conversations about fairness, civil liberties, and the rights of all people, even those considered outsiders. And yet, the shadow of the Haymarket era lingered. The prisoners' stories whispered among families and communities reminded future generations that freedom is fragile. They showed how fear can turn justice into punishment, and how even a nation built on liberty can falter when panic rules the day. As America moved into the 20th century, the lessons of immigrant prisoners, anarchist fears, and prisons filled with those accused of thought alone remained a cautionary tale, one that continues to echo today. The anarchist scare did more than punish a few immigrants. It changed the way a nation thought about its people, its laws, and its own identity. It proved that courage could survive even in the darkest prisons, and that fear, no matter how powerful, could never fully silence the voices of those who dared to dream of freedom.
Years passed, but the echoes of fear from the Haymarket bombing and the anarchist arrests did not fade. The streets of Chicago, once crowded with rallies and the shouts of workers demanding justice, were quieter now. Families that had lost fathers, brothers, or sons to prison watched their children grow up with the memory of fear and suspicion hanging over every immigrant neighborhood. The nation had survived the panic, but the scars it left behind were permanent. Prison walls, once seen as a place to punish criminals, had become symbols of a broader struggle. They held not only those who had committed violent acts, but also those imprisoned simply for their ideas, their foreign birth, or their association with radical movements. For the immigrant anarchists, their imprisonment had been a test of endurance. Some had lost hope, some had clung to solidarity. All had learned that ideas, even peaceful ones, could be twisted into weapons against the innocent when fear dominated the law. Across America, communities carried these lessons forward. Activists, reformers, and future labor leaders cited the Haymarket trials and subsequent arrests as a warning about prejudice, panic, and the power of propaganda. Prisons slowly changed, labor laws evolved, and courts began to recognize that ideology alone was not a crime. But even with progress, the tension between freedom and fear remained. Immigrant communities learned to navigate a nation where suspicion could fall on anyone who was different. The anarchists who survived their prison sentences returned to life with heavy hearts and cautious eyes. Many never spoke publicly again. Some fled to other countries, seeking peace after years of persecution. Others remained quietly in the United States, carrying the memory of what had happened and sharing their stories in whispers. These stories became part of the fabric of American history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of fear, the resilience of the human spirit, and the high cost of justice denied. The anarchist scare of the 1880s and 1890s left America with a paradox. It revealed the nation's vulnerability to panic and prejudice, but it also highlighted the courage of ordinary people standing against oppression. The immigrant prisoners, once seen as enemies of the state, had shown that resilience, hope, and the pursuit of justice could survive even the harshest walls and the most fearful hearts. As the sun set on Chicago and the cities of America, one truth remained. Fear can imprison bodies, but it cannot contain ideas. The voices of the immigrant anarchists, their courage in the face of injustice, and the lessons learned from their trials continued to shape America for decades to come. Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure, resist, and demand a better, fairer world. The scandal, the fear, the prison cells, and the executions of that era were not just history, they were a warning. A warning that a society that allows fear to replace justice risks losing its soul. And yet, the courage of those who dared to think, speak, and hope reminds us that freedom is never truly lost, even behind the highest walls. Don't let these stories of courage and injustice fade away. Hit subscribe, share this video, and join us as we uncover more hidden chapters of history. Your support keeps the truth alive. Start watching the next story now.